Welcome to another episode of Let's Code on Expert TV. And I'm pleased today to have with me Dave Nugent, one of our developer advocates on the West Coast of the US, in San Francisco, I believe, Dave. Maybe take a minute to introduce yourself and let us know what drives your dev advocacy these days, and how are things going on the West Coast?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of how things are going, the West Coast, currently there are a lot of fires, and I should mention that I am not responsible for any of those. It's just totally unrelated. My advocacy work focuses on non-flammable things like Kubernetes and Red Hat OpenShift and other DevOpsy type stuff. But I actually got my start as a JavaScript developer. So I love JavaScript. I love front end and full stack work. And when I first joined IBM, I started on a lot of like AI, machine learning, and front end advocacy before moving into Kubernetes and OpenShift after the Red Hat acquisition.
Okay, great. And Kubernetes is certainly the topic of the day. We've heard a lot over the last year or so about a Build Smart on Kubernetes World Tour, and I wondered if you could give us a brief overview on what that is and what we're trying to do to reach developers about Kubernetes.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Build Smart on Kubernetes World Tour is something that we've been doing for a while to try to popularize. I mean, Kubernetes is already super popular out there in the DevOps community, but try to popularize learning about Kubernetes, learning about Red Hat OpenShift, not only for people who are inside operations and DevOps, but also for the developer community at large. And so we have a number of live workshops that happen all around the world. They're convenient to every different time zone. And a lot of these are ones that I'll be hosting. So you can see here, earlier today, we had a hybrid cloud authentication lab with Google. And next week, we're going to do one with LinkedIn. And then also you can see replays of all these past workshops that we've done. So some of these are going to be very introductory, just I don't know anything about Kubernetes and I want to learn something. Some of them will be more advanced. Some of them will target application developers and talk about how to deploy your application so that it's more resilient across different public or private clouds. Some of them will be targeted again at people just learning the terminology, and then some of them will be targeted at DevOps professionals. So it's all about trying to bring this developer education out there to the masses, all the sort of knowledge that we've built up inside the company, trying to spread that out and make that more accessible to everyone.
Right, right. Sounds great. And from what I can tell, there's been well over 300 workshops that have been run in the last year or so, and roughly 18,000 developers engaged in some of this training. So it's sounds like it's a great program that's continuing on.
Yeah.
We the What would you say are some of the benefits to developers? What kind of things have you been using to in the World Tour to help developers gain new skills?
Oh, it's a great question. A lot of times as a software developer myself, I'm really interested in the actual the process of crafting the software, loading the dependencies, making sure that everything works. But then once the bug is fixed or the latest version is shipped, a lot of times I'm not necessarily connected with what happens after that. Right. And so a lot of the experience that I've gotten out of the Build Smart on Kubernetes World Tour has been just understanding how that happens. Like once you ship the feature, once it's containerized, once the container image is out there in your private registry on Docker Hub or whatever, how does that actually get deployed out and scaled? And what is the difference, for example, between a public cloud and a private cloud deployment? We've also done workshops with sort of like late breaking stuff like how would you actually deploy something on Red Hat OpenShift on an edge network or on multiple different public clouds. And so it's also nice because, as a developer advocate for IBM, I can actually go out and say, hey, here's Kubernetes, which is this, open source software project that can really help with your DevOps procedures, but also Red Hat OpenShift, this enterprise Kubernetes product. This is something that you can deploy on any platform. So I don't have a horse in this race, right? It doesn't have to be on IBM Cloud. It can be on any one of these other public cloud providers, or it could could be on your own data center, your own private cloud, or your local machine. So it's really nice to just be able to bring that education to everybody and not necessarily have to be about, selling something, and just make it more about their application and solving their problems.
Right, right. I see from some of the comments just coming up that somebody actually has just attended one of the workshops that was run by one of our colleagues, Branson.
Oh,
Bradston.
Bradston, nice. Yeah,
And,
Bradston's workshops are really good.
yeah, and so that's good to hear. All part of this world tour effort to bring the message about just that aspect of containers, Kubernetes, making the distribution of software, the running of software, even the development of software, much more consistent across all these multiple platforms. And glad to hear that things are going well. I wondered if you could, when you're working through educating developers around containers and Kubernetes and microservices, using World Tour as the backdrop. Can you talk about the various types of labs and workshops that you have been personally delivering? I mean, you've touched on a couple, but what are the key topic areas that you're covering?
No, absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of the stuff that I've been doing personally because of my background in software development has been more about deploying applications and deploying containers. And so it's taking the perspective of, I'm a Java developer, I'm a JavaScript developer, I'm some other application developer, or maybe I'm an executive inside an organization like VP of software development. How is this procedure going to affect me? Like and also how can I build my applications so that I can take advantage of some of the benefits that Kubernetes and containerized infrastructure offers. So not just, I'm going to take my application the way it is today and deploy it to a cloud running on Kubernetes, but also how can I architect my application so that as I continue to add features to it and make it more resilient, I can take advantage of those cloud features. So for example, microservices is one that you mentioned. If I have a monolithic application that I've been working on, maybe this is something where now I have the ability to break up that application into a number of independent microservices communicating through some kind of maybe a lightweight RESTful API or maybe some sort of message broker middleware, and then take each of those microservices individually and scale them up or down depending on demand, and then also make them high availability by deploying them again across different availability zones across different regions. So in that case, you end up with this really full-featured application that's also incredibly resilient. If one availability zone goes down, if you lose a particular network connection, it can actually fail over, and you make more efficient use of your resources. So having your software developers understand the benefits of Kubernetes and containerized infrastructure deployment can make their applications more resilient, cheaper to run, and can make you a better software developer. I know that there are other colleagues of mine who get much deeper into the nitty gritty of Kubernetes actually managing pods across different public clouds. That's not something that I currently do, but I know that Bradston, it looks like he had one workshop even this morning also has this Red Hat OpenShift 1001 series. So I definitely recommend checking that one out too.
Right. Yeah, I guess that's the one that was referenced earlier in the comments. But that's great. And I think from my perspective, we've seen a lot of benefit to developers and even through to DevOps engineers around some of this education. I know when we talk to developers about using Kubernetes and developing applications in a cloud native way, microservices type architectures and so on, we're able to provide lab environments which cover things like just the basics of a Node.js application, Hello World effectively on Kubernetes, up through taking deploying microservices, Java-based microservices on the cloud with Kubernetes, and then into things like how do you integrate AI into your application if it's running on OpenShift in a containerized application. So, and then if we look forward, we've run some challenges and workshops associated with the World Tour where we've done progressions around some key or fundamental concepts within OpenShift, such as the use of operators or pipelines. How do you work with those? How do they make your life as a developer or DevOps engineer easier? You talked about scalability. What do those things bring to that aspect of scaling and multi-cloud use? And so, as our audience hopefully will be able to tie into some of these things like our challenge and learning journeys. And we just recently ran a boot camp in the Middle East where they ran through a bunch of these different ideas and taking developers right from the basics of deploying that Node.js application through to understanding scalability across multiple pods and network environments. So
no, that's a really great point, because in addition to Kubernetes, since we're doing these workshops with Red Hat OpenShift, we're not just popularizing, we're not just talking and educating about Kubernetes, which is just one layer in the Red Hat OpenShift tech stack. We're actually giving you a full-fledged Red Hat OpenShift cluster, right? That includes Kubernetes, but also includes the public cloud hardware, right? The resources that you're using to run Kubernetes, and then all the developer tooling, service meshes, all of the extra opinionated stack that Red Hat has built up around OpenShift. And that's really cool, because in addition to, playing around with deploying your application, you can also look at, well, how can I leverage all of these different developer-friendly pieces of Red Hat OpenShift to make my CI/CD process better, right? Or how can I not just change my application, but how can I change the process by which my company builds and deploys applications to take advantage of all these benefits on Red Hat OpenShift? And so I love the interactive labs like you see here on the Build Smart with Kubernetes World Tour. But then also, we do have these lab environments that are actually hosted online that you can do at any time. So if none of these times work for you, you can actually learn a lot about, like you said, artificial intelligence, microservices, deploying Node applications onto Red Hat OpenShift, and you don't need to necessarily wait for me to do a presentation.
Right. Yeah, although you certainly are able to cover things and take questions and so on during those workshops that developers naturally have. I've always found developers are curious as to, okay, I understand that. Where can I take it, right? I'm wondering if you could maybe touch on the Build Smart on Kubernetes badge. I understand that we've recently introduced that. Badging seems to be growing in popularity as a on-ramp to things like certifications and stuff. So what's been your experience with the badge?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this badge personally, because not only does it let you get the same experience that you'd get from, let's say, an interactive session as part of the Build Smart with Kubernetes World Tour, but it actually lets you commit to doing 3 separate labs and then answering a quiz, and then validating that by issuing a badge so that you can actually, go to your boss or put it on your LinkedIn and say, this is something where I've passed this goalpost. So I wasn't just, sitting in a session and listening or reading something online. I was actually interactively building out and deploying an application onto a real live Red Hat OpenShift cluster running on Kubernetes. And so this is the badging page. It's issued through Credly, and it basically involves completing 3 labs and then answering an assignment. And if you click through, this is what the page looks like. So there is a leaderboard, and so once you've completed it, you could be assigned to the leaderboard. But I'd actually encourage everybody to just look at it from an educational perspective, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily matter to me how long it takes you to finish this project. The important point is that by the end of this project, you'll have completed these 3 interactive labs. So this first one, it's called Red Hat OpenShift Basics. Very straightforward. It basically shows how quickly you can take a public GitHub repository, pull all that code in, use an existing base image, in this case Node 10, supplied by Red Hat, and actually get that deployed onto a live OpenShift cluster and exposed to the internet. And so a lot of people in our labs will actually be able to do this in just 5 or 10 minutes. It's pretty amazing how quick and easy it is. With Lab 2, we've got developing cloud native applications on OpenShift with Open Liberty. And so this is also great because not only are we using these industry standard best in breed technologies of Kubernetes, Red Hat OpenShift, but we're also taking Java development to the next level by using the Open Liberty microservice framework. So we're showing you how you can actually build a Java microservice that communicates with other microservices with a lightweight JSON API. And so this lab is a little more involved, and some of that is just because there's a lot more tooling involved. So if you're running Java in an enterprise-sized company, you're probably going to have a pretty heavy tech stack where you're, deploying all the application, you're building it with Maven, and you're building containers, and then you're taking those containers, pushing them to a repo, and then deploying them. So it takes a little bit longer, but by the end, you've actually deployed another application onto your cluster, and you've now done it in 2 different languages using 2 different frameworks. So that's pretty amazing. And just like we talked about earlier, the benefits of using microservices in containerized infrastructure, you're then able to see what exactly those benefits are and how you could re-architect your applications or develop new cloud native applications to take advantage of those. And then one of the coolest labs is last, the AI integration, the Max model deployment. So we have this model asset exchange where we actually have all these publicly available machine learning models that we can actually deploy onto Red Hat OpenShift. This lab is really fun, especially to end the series, because it uses a lot more of the Red Hat OpenShift user interface. So instead of interacting with your cluster with the command line, with our OC command, you're actually going to be going through the UI and clicking around and making stuff work. And I think I actually have the UI up here. So you could actually see as you're going out and building your model asset exchange object detector. In this case, you can see the services spinning up. You can see the resources being allocated. You can get a status check on exactly what's going on, whether it's running, what ports it's using, all sorts of stuff. And it's a really beautiful user interface. So if in the beginning, you're more of a command line junkie like I am, you'll be really happy with that. But then you'll also be able to see everything that you're doing on the command line reflected in real time in this user interface. And you could see how other people in your organization, maybe they're not developers, maybe they're focused more on administration, might see a user interface like this be a lot friendlier to them if they're less familiar with the command line, so that you could have different people in your org fulfill different roles using the same clusters using Red Hat OpenShift. So that's the goal with the Build Smart on Kubernetes challenge. And then at the end, you'll just take a quick quiz. One note is that sometimes it actually helps to have the quiz up as you're doing the labs. So actually click on this test your knowledge button first and then answer the questions as you're doing the labs. And the idea is that a lot of people can actually finish all 3 labs in under an hour. For some people who are less familiar with the command line or less familiar with Kubernetes, it might take a little bit longer. If you read all of the text, I'm a developer, I don't always read all of the text in the lab unless something goes wrong, then it might take you a little bit longer, perhaps 3 hours. But it's a really great way to get introduced to these topics, but also to get your hands dirty, to actually go in and code and mess with a real live Kubernetes cluster. So I'm a huge fan of this badge.
Right. That sounds good. And I think from my own experience, the benefit of this environment, the challenge, the way it's laid out, is that you don't have to install anything locally. It's all in the cloud, directed, directed environment. Yeah, you're showing it here. So this I think is the future of that kind of engagement where you want to learn, you want to be able to explore the different aspects of the technology, but you don't necessarily have the environment available on your local machine. You don't want to install a whole bunch of stuff locally to be able to do that. So yeah, this is a great way to explore the concepts that we cover in the World Tour. So wanted to thank you, Dave, for walking us through some of these highlights, exploring the the different technologies. Is there anything in, as we kind of draw the session to a close that you'd like to call out? I think we're going to put the actual link to the challenge in the comment, or the comment section. So you'll be able to, those that are online will be able to try it out. But any wrap up thoughts that you've got about the World Tour or the challenge?
So, I would definitely recommend checking out the challenge. If you have any questions about it, also feel free to join any of our sessions for the Build Smart on Kubernetes World Tour. That we can help you answer those questions that might come up during the live sessions. Also, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. My DMs are open. I don't know if we can send a link to that in the chat as well, but usually at the end of our live sessions, I say, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. Then you can get that feedback, even though we're not in a live session together. I do sleep from time to time, so it may take a few hours to get a response. But, aside from that imperfect side effect, I'm happy to help.
Great. Well, again, to our audience, feel free to message Dave about the World Tour, the challenge. Take advantage of the opportunity to learn more about Kubernetes and what IBM is doing with with OpenShift and building our own content on it, and take the challenge. Test yourself, hopefully learn something, and in terms of Let's Code, I appreciate you coming on this week, Dave, and we'll look forward to more such talks as we go forward. You mentioned one of the topics in the challenge was around open liberty and building microservices. I'll just give a heads up to our audience that in September we're going to be doing a open liberty on multi-cloud series. So sort of exploring these ideas in a little more depth for each of the public cloud, popular public cloud offerings. So again, thanks to our audience for coming out today, and we look forward to seeing you again on another episode of Let's Code.
Thanks, Neil. Great to see you.
Yeah, take care.